Welcome to Sense of Style. I'm Stuart. 8 complex fragrances that are completely original. And to me, a complex fragrance is one that has a whole bunch of notes that you can decipher that can often be very, very different. So you can have a fragrance that's like two-dimensional or sometimes even three-dimensional. So you pick up this facet here and that facet. And the weird thing about it is it's not like a designer fragrance, which is pretty simple and straightforward. You can have some people that go, oh, it's absolutely incredible, it's unbelievable, and then others that think it's just truly awful. So it's a very subjective thing, fragrances, and complex fragrances make that even more difficult. Also, complex fragrances are more likely, much more likely actually, to not be linear. In other words, they might change from the beginning to the end. And now these types of fragrances tend to be more common in niche fragrances, but not always. I have a bit of both on this list. The one thing about complex fragrances that I really like is they're really interesting. Fragrance number 1 is Farenheit Parfum. The weird thing about Farenheit Parfum is that the top 2 accords I've never seen before anywhere else. So one of them is ozonic. So very fresh like air. And the other one is vanilla, which is like nothing like that. So an ozonic vanilla. And yet, if it was just vanilla, that would be one thing. But there's also licorice and rum to go with the vanilla because this is in many ways a gourmand. So you've got this sort of light gourmand thing, but then you've also got the fact that it was originally Farenheit was originally a light leather fragrance, so there's leather in this as well. It's been toned down a bit. They call it suede. So there's just unbelievable amounts of stuff going on with this fragrance, and yet it still works. This, to me, is François Demachy at his best. Super complex, super crazy, super interesting, with great performance. Fantastic fragrance. Fragrance number 2 is Milliseme Imperiale by Creed. And what I always think of when I see this fragrance is you're out to dinner and the person that you're with, dinner is over, and then they order a fruit cocktail. Comes, they serve it, and then all of a sudden the person reaches for a big salt shaker and just goes to town. Salt all over the fruit cocktail. And then they grab a half glass of water and pour that all over it too. Because that's essentially what Milliseme Imperial smells like. This has an aquatic accord. It has a ton of salt. And the aquatic accord is basically, it's salt water, right? So it's a salty, watery, fruity fragrance, and yet it smells incredible. So those are two things that shouldn't work, and yet they do. And honestly, if you're looking at just ignore performance, but if you're just looking at scent alone, this is probably the number 2 most popular scent from Creed. Fragrance number 3 is just flat out weird. Flat out weird. There's 5 different notes in this that are all over the place that they just shove together. And I like it. I think it's cool. This is Longval by Cartier. Now, the notes start with honey because that's essentially what this is. It's a honey-based fragrance. That is the sweetest note that you can get in fragrances. It's even sweeter than vanilla. So you're starting with that. And then you add iris. And you're like, oh, okay, I could see that. So iris and honey. So powdery, sweet fragrance. And then, though, they add the second most prominent note in this, which is Gaiac wood. And if you think birch is smoky, you should try Gaiac wood. That's what gives By the Fireplace that feeling of smelling like a fireplace, a little bit of charred wood. So basically you're taking the honey and the vanilla and throwing it in the fireplace. And you end up with this really strange toxic brew. Add musk to that as well. And it's just very strange. I think somebody came along and said, okay, this is awful. Why don't we try something? We're going to add a whole bunch of violet leaf to try and lighten the whole thing up and see if it's palatable. They did that. So the violet leaf, I think, saves this. And it really does make it a lot lighter. So it's like a lighter honey kind of woody thing. Not a ton of projection, but you get 2 feet of projection for like a couple of hours. So it's not like a 6-foot projector. It's more like 2 feet, but it stays with you. And in terms of longevity, I wore this yesterday, and after 16 hours, it was still noticeable on my skin. Fragrance number 4, this is Starman Nebula by Fragrance World. This is a clone of Pure Malt by Thierry Mugler. And at the end of the day, this fragrance ends up not smelling complex at all. But if you look at the note breakdown and how everything is put together, it does look complex. It looks incredibly complex, but the blending of this and Pure Malt, I think is brilliant, because it literally smells, this fragrance smells like it should have existed in nature. So you're starting with malt, right? So think beer, very earthy grain kind of thing. But that's not earthy enough for Mugler, because they add peat to that. So dirt, basically. So you're adding dirt to something that is like grain. So very earthy. And then they throw in some whiskey. So, like we're talking very earthy, boozy, intoxicating. What do they mix it with? Fruit and vanilla. So you've got two completely different set of notes, put it together. And oh my God, does it smell good. I mean, we all know it. This is like one of the most, if not the most popular clone on the market, but it's brilliant. It's got performance. It smells masculine. It smells good. Brilliant. Fragrance number 5, this is Velvet by Franck Boclet. And Franck Boclet is a weird guy. I mean this. He wants to be the Tom Ford of France. So basically, it is a designer house, Franck Boclet. He makes other things. But he said on numerous occasions that he makes niche fragrances. You can't do that. However, if you look at the actual fragrances that he makes, they're all really creative. They're all super high quality, and they have great performance. And this is no exception. You want to talk creativity? He has a fragrance called Cocaine. So he's not messing around the creative area. And the same thing with this. So this comes in a white bottle, which is unisex, which the white bottle usually means for women, right? And when you look at the notes, like you're starting off with cotton candy, right? So cotton candy, and then peach and plum. Oh my God, no guy would take a look at this, see those notes, and ever purchase this. Again, though, he's a weird guy. He throws in cedar, and cedar is the strongest note in this fragrance. It's what you notice the most. And then they add sandalwood, and it's not a clean, powdery, sweet sandalwood. It is like the kind that you get in Santal 33, the sharp sandalwood, working with the cedar and some musk. So again, 2 different fragrances. This one comes together, to my nose anyway, smelling very unisex, slightly masculine. It's got phenomenal performance, like 12 hours, and very, very high quality. I love this next fragrance. This is Narcisco Rodriguez for him. And why I like it is because this is the first fragrance in a line, and normally those are mass appealing and people really like them, but this fragrance is super odd. The thing that most people say this smells like the most, it smells like wet cement, like wet pavement. And it doesn't sound appealing, but just imagine, you're in New York City, you're downtown, it has rained, and so there's this little bit of sort of spiciness, freshness at the same time. It smells kind of fresh and invigorating. That's what this smells like, and it's just bizarre, especially when you give the fact that it's an EDT in an entire line. So basically, you've got a lot of violet leaf. You have an accord, an aquatic accord. I guess that's where the rain comes from. So violet leaf, very fresh, and the rainy accord. And then you've got a lot of patchouli, very woody, and some musk. Put it all together and you get wet pavement. It does smell good. The performance isn't fantastic, but then again, it's only an EDT. Next up, we have another fragrance where you can really notice 5 different notes. This is Lattafa's Liam, and this is a clone of BDK Parfum's Gris Charnel. And the 5 notes here, so I'm going to leave the one note for last, but let's start with vanilla. This is quite sweet, and iris. So the end result is kind of creamy. It's really pleasant. And then you add tea, and I guess it makes it a little more soothing. And then finally, you've got fig. So that's kind of a green and fruity feel. So it's very odd, but I got to admit, I really do like the early part of it when you get those 4 notes. It really works. The 5th note, however, really makes an impact to my nose, and it's cardamom. Now, I don't notice the cardamom, and I haven't timed it, but I don't notice it for the first maybe hour or maybe 2. I get the sweet, the creaminess, the fig, the tea. I get that early on, and it smells just beautiful. I got to be honest, though, when the cardamom kicks in, it's very spicy, and you really notice it. And you notice all 5 notes, which is odd. But I don't enjoy it quite as much after that, but everyone sure as hell seems to. The fact that they've made a clone of Gris Charnel means it's super popular. It is a really good fragrance with really good performance as well. Even the clone is good. But yeah, again, very complex. And this is by far the least linear fragrance on the list because you get one thing to begin, and then midway through you get that cardamom popping up, and it gets much spicier. Finally, we've got Habit Rouge Eau de Parfum. This is from Guerlain. This is from 1966. And this might be, I haven't tried a whole ton of older fragrances, but to my nose, very complicated. Maybe the first complicated designer ever. Because there's, again, 5 different facets that I can pick up very clearly. Now, it starts off, doesn't sound like 1966. So we're going to start off with the citrus, like a lot of lemon and rose, and a powdery rose, a designer rose, you know, not a niche rose. So yeah, very feminine. However, it is 1966, so you got to add leather, and so that tones everything else down. And then you've also got carnation, which is a very old-fashioned note, which is a spicy flower, so spicy floral feel, definitely very masculine, often associated with men. And then to top it all off, you have a thin sort of old-fashioned vanilla note, making the whole thing very sweet. Very complex fragrance. But yeah, this one is quite complex. You know, who knows? It may be the first one. Anyway, I love complex fragrances. I love going on a ride. Really enjoy, you know, messing around with different things that I pick up at different times. They don't all have to be niche fragrances either. There's a few designers on this list. Anyway, thanks for watching.